We're going to get started. Okay. Thank you all for being here. I'm Renee Barrio, the Chief Curator here at the McNay, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dalton Atkins. Many of you know John, some of you don't. And I have the pleasure of working with John every day here at the McNay. He's on our preparatory staff, so we have like a lot of interaction all day. So it's nice to speak with you as you're an artist in a different context. For those of you who are not familiar with this program, every year the McNay invites area-based artists to show work and to have some kind of presentation, generally a conversation about their work. And I'm delighted to see here in the audience tonight several artists who have participated in this series. So thank you for your participation and also for being here and for supporting each other. And I think most of us know how supportive San Antonio's artist community is of one another and and really taking advantage of this opportunity to hear from an artist directly and to learn more about their work. So thanks, John, for joining us.
Thank you.
We're going to start, like I try to always do, is just get a little biographical kind of background in for people who are not familiar with you and your work and about who you are and like how did you get here tonight?
Sure.
Not literally how you got here tonight, but what brought you here?
I have a new truck.
Okay, now we know.
My name is Dalton Atkins. I'm from Belle Chasse, Louisiana, and Belle Chasse is a suburb city of New Orleans, so it's just about 5 minutes south. It's not the swamp, you know, there's a major highway that runs through it, so it's kind of a suburb. Let's see, I went to undergrad in Louisiana at Southeastern Louisiana University. Got my BA there in new media, animation, and sculpture.
Where is that?
So that was in Hammond, Louisiana, and that's just above Lake Pontchartrain, about an hour north of New Orleans. And four-year college there, worked for the college's theater for a while in set building, prop production, painting. And a year later, came here for grad school at UTSA and just finished the grad program there with an MFA in sculpture in May. And now I work here at the McNay, and I'm still making art. My studio's at Blue Star. I share a studio with Justin Korver, who is in Berlin right now. And now we're here. Okay. Got off work a couple hours ago.
And you didn't have to leave.
Right, yeah, I just, you know. So the work I'm going to show is in chronological order from about 2011, which was about a third of the way through my undergraduate degree. And that's when I really stopped thinking like a student and started thinking like an artist about what I wanted to make and why I wanted to make it.
What do you mean by that?
So when you go to, you go to art school and of course, you know, they give you assignments, drawing one, you know, draw this, draw that, study still lives, values, etc. And some people get trapped in wanting assignments, you know, so they want to use their whole 4 years and they kind of can't break away from the structure of being given assignments. And I was lucky enough that the school that I went to, I had some really amazing professors who treated me as an adult and as a professional and let me kind of run free. And so, you know, a year and a half in, I just was like, you know, I'm here to make my work and they don't care what I do as long as I do it and do a lot of it. So yeah, after a long summer break, I'd been thinking about this structure in my head. I didn't know what it was about or why I wanted to make it. But I got back, I started ripping down a bunch of walnut wood and scrap woods and built this. It's called Hermitage, and it's about 5 feet tall. The top lights up, which is very important because now it is the main lamp in my parents' living room. So,
but were you thinking about it as a functional thing when you made it?
No, it was. Functional in the effect that it like gives the artwork life, and it's a lighthouse, this sort of dystopian, melancholy lighthouse, where maybe a hermit would live. But yeah, so yeah, my parents held on to it, and they're very practical people. My mom's favorite artwork is like trees and forests and animals and stuff that reminds her of her home in Kentucky. So, you know, naturally she loves this, and it hangs out in the living room. But this sort of sparked a body of work that I continued on to finish as my thesis work in undergrad. And it's a series of sculptures that were about this somewhat futuristic, alternate future dystopian version of, I guess, Earth. So there's more of those.
And what about this, like,
The materials?
no, I'm thinking more about on the right image, this kind of projection, like a gangplank or something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that is sort of like a little pier, and that's the only entrance into that whole structure. And it's got a little white picket fence around it, made out of popsicles, no, coffee stirrers. So yeah, the scale of this, like that area right there is only about this big. And yeah, I wanted it to reflect sort of a traditional lighthouse. But lighthouses aren't made of wood, and they're not often covered in moss, and they don't have peaked roofs. And so I was really just kind of messing with the structure. And at the same time, too, I was looking at some of the paintings from the Precisionist movement, like Charles Sheeler, and the hard angles and architecture kind of went into these things. And all the materials are found stuff that people just got rid of that I would tear down and remake. So part of the same series was this pier. This had less of a story than the other one, but I just, you know, there's a lot of piers. My family we'd go to Panama City, Florida for most of our vacations, and you know, there's a lot of lovely piers that go really far out into the water, and I always imagined how far down must the pylons go on the end of it to reach the ground.
Right.
And so I was thinking, like, what if the water dried up and this was left standing? So
What's the scale of this?
this is about 6 feet long, so about 2.5 feet tall, and it's in 4 parts. It was in 4 parts. It doesn't exist anymore.
What happened?
Well, you know, art, like most things in life, has to sometime go away. I graduated, and I had a professor who wanted this piece and ended up taking something more manageable for his house, because, you know, who has 6 feet worth of
So you destroyed
wall?
it?
Yeah, I did. But, you know, it was easy to make for me, and I had fun making it. I could very well make another one. But, yeah, you know, things have to go away, and that one went away. These were 2 more pieces in that series. The sort of bouquet of power lines at the bottom is part of a small engine from a weed eater or something, and the carburetors that went with it. So those dowels that make the power lines, I hand-turned those on a table saw, which is extremely dangerous and makes a huge mess. And then there's small spark plugs as transformers. And so at this point, I had already had something in my head, because I was like, okay, well, I have a 1.5 years left of school. I want to make something nice. And so I started making these characters for this animation, because I was still very invested in new media. And then on the right is a windmill. And I guess if you can't tell, like, I'm kind of drawn to these structures that are, their purpose, the way they're built is part of their purpose. You know, like a windmill doesn't have to be very heavy, so it's made of these spindly cross sections, and the mechanics are all up top. I like these things that are made for function.
Were these things you were seeing like in person, or were these things you were mostly seeing like you were imagining, or seeing in pictures, or?
There were no windmills where I'm from.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, there's no windmills in Belchase. But there are a lot of, so Belchase is a city that sits right on the Mississippi River. I could walk out my back door, walk for a couple hundred feet, go over the levee, and be at the river. And so we had this thing called the C train, which was where the train tracks would run up to the levee, across the levee into the river, and barges could sit there and unload cargo onto the train. So my house was sort of surrounded by these little places of decrepit things that were no longer in use. There were some warehouses and stuff. So yeah, I got really into like things that were kind of falling apart, or that man-made, being taken apart by nature. So yeah, while I didn't grow up around windmills, you know, I just really liked the way they look. And then, so yeah, I started figuring out what my narrative was for this body of work, and I love factories. I think they're really cool looking. My dad's dad, my grandfather, worked in a paper mill in North Louisiana for a very long time, and so the few times that we visited up there, I'd sort of see paper mills, and they were really bizarre places. And this body of work was hugely affected by my love of movies and sci-fi and fantasy things, and I really like dystopian stuff, Mad Max, and just anything that fits that genre.
So what's interesting to me is what you're describing, this landscape and this very kind of rural, not rural, but this like all this nature, right? And we're not really seeing that in the work. So,
and that aspect comes in the animation that I made out of these, and because I was still formulating in my head, you know, I was like, well, I'll make a stop motion with these because I knew how stop motion was made. After about 100 pictures, I realized I didn't want to do that, and I had access to After Effects and had taken 2 full semesters of After Effects and realized that I could take a picture and animate it much more easily. So yeah, the nature component comes in the animation and isn't really a part of the physical sculptures. But yeah, so this sculpture, this is a Champion Corporation factory, and it's made out of the parts of about 4 or 5 small engines that I screwed around a bunch of 2x4s and glued parts to it, and it was about this tall in 2 parts, and this is the sort of the bad guy, I guess.
And we're still in your undergraduate years, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, this was my body of thesis work. So, and then this is exclusive content. Actually, nobody's ever seen this. So yeah, in my future narrative, the Champion Corporation is like this big factory that's, you know, gross and disgusting, everything that you wouldn't want a factory to be. And I was like, okay, you know, everybody hears the quaint little story of Walmart and how it got its humble beginnings, and now it's Walmart. So I just I made this poster in Illustrator, kind of imagining the evolution of a champion, and I wanted to make it this very corporate, self-serving, look how big and great we are kind of thing. But it's just an image. I never printed it or anything.
So you were thinking this is the work of art?
I really wanted it to be, and I still want it to be. I just, you know, in the life of an artist, you know, graduating, moving, starting a new place, moving to new artwork, this kind of just got lost on a flash drive. Not that I don't think about it. Like, I think about it every week. I think about a lot of stuff, but there's only so many things you can work on at once. But yeah, you know, I imagine this printed on a nice piece of paper and a cool, like a very gaudy, like oak frame that would be in kind of a CEO's office, and it's self-aggrandizing, but also kind of showing their bad side. So yeah, the bottom's got a bunch of legal jargon. This piece is called the Syndicate, and in my animation, it's the good guy, the protagonist. And it's a barn. It's a barn that I morphed and added a bunch of windows to. And I also was thinking about it as being kind of like a farmer's market. Again, growing up in New Orleans, there's the farmer's market right on the river. And so, yeah, many weekends I experienced what it's like to be around a group of people whose common interest is to sell their goods and to coexist, and they're not really harming anybody. So yeah, this piece was about 2 feet tall. And
So in terms of your working process, like when you're conceiving a piece like this, do you draw it out? Do you just start putting things together? How does that happen?
yeah, I am notoriously bad for not wanting to sketch anything before I start on it. The way I've always felt is like if I put too much work into a sketch, then the life of the art is like, the experience for me is like, well, there's a picture of it. I can move on with something else. If I just start into the materials and start into the textures and the colors and imagining lighting it and putting all these small details together, for me it's much more organic and fun, and I don't feel committed to a sketch. So yeah, I usually, like for this, I used a bandsaw and tore down a bunch of scrap pine into sticks and covered a bunch of 1/4-inch Luan and those textures, and then all the signs I designed on Illustrator based on my family and printed those. So there's a lot of small parts, and then I hand weather everything. Everything gets scrubbed and dirtied.
So you mentioned you had done theater sets. So all those techniques you then
Absolutely.
apply to making all
Yeah.
this.
I had a lot of fun doing Sweeney Todd. A lot of rust, a lot of dirt, blood. So yeah, that definitely, that's what got me my job at the theater for the year was, the theater professor would come over to sculpture because we had a CNC machine and would help him make stuff. And he was just like, well, come, I'll pay you to do this. So here's the shortened version of the animation, first couple of minutes.
And that's the piece we just saw.
Yeah. So all the sculptures we just looked at are in here in some form or fashion. And so here's the nature aspect, which there's not much of.
Here's your
As the pier, yeah. So yeah, that was about the first half of it, and
How long is the whole piece?
about 5.5 minutes. And basically, the way it plays out is the smog all gets to the barn, and the barn kind of shuts down, and then fights back and repowers itself, and the smog goes back. And so it represents this kind of endless cycle of sort of people versus each other. My idea for that piece was, corporations, large places, and the handmade and small things, and the environment, and man versus nature, man versus man, and this endless cycle that we're in. And this was actually, so this piece predates all of that work. I just wanted to put it at the end because it was something that I made, again, this is when I was still working through assignments, and our assignment was to make a kinetic sculpture.
Uh-huh.
And having access to a CNC machine, my professor worked with me to cut these gears, and I designed the landscapes that got cut out of a few of them. And so if you crank that handle, the whole thing rotates, and all the gears turn and present a sort of timeline. So that piece represented the idea that went into the animation.
And did you pursue animation? I mean, did you do other animations? Or?
I've done a few things after that were just sort of small stuff that I did for a two-person show I had in Covington.
Mm-hmm.
But no, when I got to grad school, I just got really heavy into physical stuff.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see some of that coming up.
Yeah. So this is still an undergrad, and this work was done at the same time as the stuff we just looked at. And I was a lab monitor, so I spent all of my afternoons and evenings at the lab. I had keys, I had access to work. My professor didn't care, so I was there a lot. I have a problem. And these were more of those kinetic pieces. I made 16 of these, all found objects. All of the small rods are all welding rods and stuff. And yeah, I was just making these whimsical sort of toys. Mm-hmm. And weird little moments and scenarios and scenes, and they're all hand-cranked viewer interactive pieces. So the piece on the left is called Real Little Fish. And yeah, they were all punny and funny and found objects.
All these components, are there components that you find and buy, or are they anonymous? Are there things that from your family, or do you have any kind of attachment to them?
No, so yeah, this specific series was this was almost primarily stuff that people just threw in the scrap bin. Mm-hmm. I'm very frugal about my art material spending, and so if I can get a piece of wood that I can alter for free, I'll do that. And so yeah, I was just taking all of this stuff from the scrap bins, and then I had people bringing me objects at the time.
So it didn't have this nostalgic quality or this personal memory. It was
the objects for me, I didn't have a bond to them. I loved them because they were old. Mm-hmm. The same reason I love going to a thrift shop is because I like old stuff. So yeah, I made a lot of these just for fun on the side. And that one, I really liked that one. The little crank would make the waves go up and down, and the little boat would move.
When you started these, did you know where you were going with it when you started it? No.
Nope. And I think for me, that's the most exciting thing.
The discovery.
I don't like to have a plan. There's a lot of stuff that we have to plan for all the time in a day, like plan to get up 5 minutes early to make coffee, find your clothes, do whatever. So with my artwork, I like to just have that freedom that I don't have to plan too much. Things can be rough, things can be intuitive and organic and fun.
So detail that piece?
Yeah, that's that piece with a little alteration. So the highlight of my career up until this point was that series of sculptures was purchased and put on American Horror Story in the Freak Show season. So they made their screen debut for about a minute and a half. They were the products of the character called Twisty the Clown, who was a clown who couldn't make it in the circus, and he just couldn't figure out how to be funny or something. And
how did they find you? How did that happen?
I had 2 or 3 of these pieces on Etsy at the time because they were just hanging out at my apartment, and I wasn't doing anything with them. So yeah, they were on Etsy, and there was a lady named Nancy who's a prop acquisitionist who would spend all day on the internet looking for whatever they needed for shoots, and she gets on Etsy because she was like, I needed handmade toys for this clown.
Right.
And luckily, the guy who made marble machines did not email her back fast enough. And I only lived an hour away because they shot this in New Orleans.
Right.
So yeah, the pieces were on American Horror Story, and I was lucky enough to be invited to the set for 3 days in a row, and I got to watch, Kathy Bates do monologue as a bearded lady, and I ate dinner near Evan Peters, and I got to watch them film with my artworks that they allowed me to edit, because that was part of the thing, was like, we need to make them look a little more clown-like, and I was like, that's fine. That's the life of an artwork, Like, I have one artwork that's a lamp at my parents' house, and I have a few that I had to edit for TV, no big deal. So, yeah, there's some more shots with different artworks. I got to meet him, his name's John as well. He was really nice, and all of this took place inside of a warehouse. They on Chapatula Street, there's a bunch of warehouses that they were using for filming during the filming boom in New Orleans. And this is all structures that were inside that they lit and controlled. And yeah, it was a really cool experience.
John, I was going to ask, would that minute and a half of screen time supersede, that's the highlight of your career until this time, supersede your completion of the master's program? But if you were in eyeshot at Kathy Bates, that answers that question.
Yeah. I mean, if I could have shaken her hand, nothing would have topped that. Kathy Bates. So this is post-grad. I took a year off in between undergrad, trying to figure out whether grad school was for me.
Stay in Louisiana?
Yeah, and because there's a lot of opportunities there for filming and theater and props and movies and stuff. But in the meantime, I was still working on campus at the theater, and my sculpture professor, Jeff Mickey, was super cool. We had a great relationship, and he was just like, yeah, dude, use the shop, be an artist, be cool about it. So my best friend and I, Zach Slough, we had a 2-person show, and this was some of the work that I made for it. And I was still going on the agrarian, rural culture stuff, and just trying to morph the forms and get away from the straightforward structures. So
Right.
This was like a grain silo on top of kind of an Art Deco precisionist hard angled thing with this weird mess of piers and stuff in the middle of it to meld them together. These are more structures I was making. The one on the left, the sort of clamshell looking one, that was called Lepidoptera, which is either the class or the family name of moths. I don't know. You know that. So I named it that because the texture that I had built up of sand and paint and the green areas looked a lot like the fuzziness of a moth wing when you zoom in on it. And the top and bottom parts of those is a piece of ash wood that I previously was a different lamp that I really liked, and I deconstructed it to go on this piece. And the other 2 pieces were, this whole body of work, these structures are just sort of an exploration in a sculpture that is its own singular narrative. Like if you look at a house without anything around it, you can kind of start imagining where's that house from, who lives in it. And I like things that are just really away from the mundane, so.
And what about color? It's like you're shying away from color.
Yeah, I was never, and that changes.
Was that like a conscious thing or just?
I don't know. I mean, clearly I love bright things, right? Wearing, I almost considered wearing what I had to work, which is darker than this, but I don't know. I really like the sort of, I guess the plasticity of really bright things. I had a lot of critiques in school where people would ask me why I didn't use new things or plastic objects from certain time periods, and I just never really felt connected to those really plastic, hard, shiny things. They didn't feel real. They feel like throwaway objects for me. I grew up being taught to cherish these handmade, rough things.
Right. Because every New Orleans area artist for a generation always had glitter somewhere in their work for years. So-
not me. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, is like I looked at a lot of art on, in Jackson Square forever that was like very bright, a lot of gold leaf, So I just never felt really into that stuff. I started making artworks based around the objects that I liked. This was another piece that I made for that show. It was called Kickstart. And it was a hand-cranked kinetic piece. The gear on the bottom right is the one that you would turn, and gear reduces up to the one that's got the propeller on it. So you can turn it as fast as you want, and it slows it down on the way up. And then the propeller would sort of flop over at a certain point and hit itself. And then the next picture shows the little copper bits that I hammered out by hand.
So it's interesting to me because you work here, right, in a situation where you can't touch anything.
Right.
And all your work is about being interactive.
Right.
So there's this strange.
Well, I do get to touch stuff.
Yeah.
Because
Well, okay.
I work half-time for collections.
That's true.
And I get to touch anything I want. Don't touch anything. I mean, yeah,
So
obviously.
you're sending a mixed message here.
Right. I wear gloves, like I understand the fragility of the object. So yeah, this is the beginning of grad school.
I see a little Texas
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So, and coincidentally, that license plate that's on the helmet represents the long and beautiful collection of found objects that Ken Little brought me over the 3 years. So, thank you, Ken. Yeah, I know you do. So, I was still using the texture and the forms of the barns and stuff, but I wanted to start experimenting and looking at the human form and getting away from the small scale and making them human scale. So I started making this helmet to fit on my head, and it's that big. And because I was making these armors that were these still thinking about dystopian futures, agrarian culture, people fighting over croplands and stuff. I was imagining these scenarios, and so armor for farmers would be farmer. So yeah, I just made this form to hold it, and it's its own torso. Thank you. And at the same time, I was making these tools/weapons.
So these were made here in San Antonio.
Yes. Yeah. Everything from this point forward is grad school. Yeah. So this was a body of work that was about 12 or 13 pieces, and they were all found object assemblages, handheld tools and weapons. And I was thinking about, in the future when people are much more wary about how we'll act with each other and resources might be scarce, what kind of things will we have to interact with each other and to sort of test the waters. So the piece on the left, that conical sort of, the handle with the cone on it, that's for like listening to through doors and stuff, and then if you hear somebody, you can use the one on the right to knock on the door. So it's a door knocker made of a doorknob. And then
This is all part of that same series.
part of the same series, right?
And did
then
you practice with them?
I did. I went outside and messed around with them.
See if they worked?
And at least, yeah. Well, and that too. These
that
were my first experiments in welding too. So this was the first time I welded anything, and I'd paint them, and then go outside and drag them through the ground and rough them up. So yeah, we have a battle axe that's welded to a pipe wrench, and the green one in the middle, I never quite figured out what that one was for. I always imagined it was like a hammer for greeting people with, because it's green, but it never felt right in my hand. It was the smallest one. I just kind of liked it. The
It
one
has
on
some
the
color
right,
too.
Huh?
It has color. too.
Yeah. This was a huge step for me too. Was like, how much color can I use all at once? The one on the right has got a lot of interesting thought that went into it. So the saying, draw a line in the sand. That saying means that, for instance, you're giving somebody the option to cross a line. If you draw a line in the sand and they cross it, bad luck for them. They shouldn't have crossed the line. This piece is for making 2 lines in the sand. So it gives the person the opportunity to cross 1 line because they're feeling buck, but then they can stop before the 2nd line. And if they stop before the 2nd line, you can clock them with the back end of it that's got some spikes.
So is it, you draw it with the top end, with the wide part, or
Yeah,
draw at the
so where-
bottom?
yeah,
with the,
where it
or
comes
the,
apart,
Because
yeah,
at the
you would
bottom,
drag-
you could
yeah.
have little two,
The
they're-
bottom is where you hold it. and
oh,
you
they're
can
close
kinda, like,
together. See, they're little
Yeah.
2 points.
Yeah,
No?
that's just like a pair of brass knuckles. And so, yeah, I made the boxes to all hold equipment and tools that would sort of be for upkeeping these. You like that, Gary? So this was part of the same series, but a little bit detached. This is my first bronze piece. The axe head is bronze. And so 1/2 of it is a felling axe for trees, and the other half is part of a saw for, sawing lumber.
Teeth.
Yeah, and it's got a walnut handle. I put a lot of work into making it a little bit nicer than the rest. And this is about like the hand-me-down objects that we get, family heirlooms that go in a box and you don't touch them. Like you don't eat off of the fine china. You don't touch this axe. You don't use it for chopping down trees.
What about the number?
Yeah, so 1.220, that was my studio number at West Campus. And for this body of work, I started sticking it on everything. It was actually on the side of all of those boxes that we just looked at. And that has to do with our ownership over stuff. Almost every workshop that I've been in the world, Louisiana and Texas, the world, people mark their equipment with their name or a color so that they know it's theirs because they bought it, they made it. They don't want
Right.
somebody to walk off with it. So yeah, it's about ownership and having a system. So yeah, these all had a system for how to secure them in.
So this was a big series. You have a-
Yeah, there was like 12 or 13 pieces, and it was, I put a lot of work into this. That was a really busy semester, my first semester. I kind of didn't do anything except for make work, but they were also, I was getting used to being at UTSA and coming from a program in Louisiana where I had a lot of freedom, but also the sculpture lab was sort of a controlled chaos. UTSA's facilities are the exact opposite of that. It's like controlled control. So there's an in-depth system for how to get everything. You have to go get a set of keys to unlock certain things, and sometimes to get to a different set of keys. So yeah, all of these tools are secured with like screws that have wire wrapping over them. So if you want to get to them, you
And
have
that
to
was a
snip the wire.
response sort of to the situation you were in.
Yeah, because it's frustrating. I want to work, and then I have to like deal with all of these inconveniences while just trying to have fun. This is a water fountain. This is part of the same piece. Like, how could you collect water if it hardly ever rains? You just leave this outside, and it fills up the little, containers up top and funnels into the bottom. And, not to rag on UTSA because it's a lovely school, but safety is a big thing. So while the whole water collection system is janky and disgusting, the actual part that you drink out of is at least painted nice and bright and clean. So that's an installation of those tools. This was my first installation at UTSA in my studio. I used the whole studio for an installation. And again, wonderful Ken Little had just started bringing me all of this stuff, all kinds of things, rope, boxes, and I just needed to use it all to see what it would look like in a space.
And when you were making all of these discrete objects, were you thinking about the installation, or that came later as a result of?
No, that came later. I mean, I think I did this specific one because we did a little CAM event up at UTSA, Contemporary Art Month, and I had been thinking about installation for a long time, and it had been mentioned in critiques, and I was like, okay, well, I'll just devote 4 weeks to tricking out my studio. And it was difficult because all my stuff that I worked on was in the way while I was trying to install it and use it. So this was the centerpiece. It was this sort of torso armor with power lines on the back on a really gaudy gold pedestal that I made.
And then you add that kind of tarp ceiling.
Yeah, the tarp ceiling, which, at the time, I was just like, well, I have this tarp, I can use it. And then as I was using it, I was like, someone's going to bring up that this is about Louisiana and Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
Because it was like blue
Right.
tarps all over the place.
Right.
So, and yeah, the whole installation turned into, I made a sign that went outside my door that hung up until my last day there called, I just forgot, it starts with an E, the Emporium, yeah. So yeah, the whole place was supposed to be like a one-stop shop for travelers. But it's all like crap that you would find in the apocalypse. Like, I need a small piece of plastic. Oh, we have a small piece of plastic. Here you go.
It's just like a Mad Max traveler.
Yeah.
Kind of Buc-ee's.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. But
How long was this up? How long was it installed?
well, I needed my space back. I kept it up for like 3 weeks and tried to work around it, but it was a lot of work to like get all that stuff up. Yeah, so that was a series of ceramic hard hats that I did. I took a plaster mold of a hard hat and then did slip casts and made about 30 of them. And those never really went anywhere, that's art, you know, it happens a lot. But I thought they were really funny because hard hats are made of plastic and they're really hard because of the sort of plasticity and bouncing nature of plastic. But ceramic is also hard, but really fragile. So a hard hat made of ceramic is like not at all doing the job that it's supposed to do. And they all had dents and scratches in them that I added while they were still greenware, which adds to the layer of absurdity because if they had been marked while they were hard, they would have just broken. Which is another shot of the installation. So these were two pieces that I made for a show at the Guadalupe, Los de Abajo with Juan Mora and Jason Gonzalez, curated by Andre Renteria. And these two pieces were, so the tricycle on the right, I started making that. I made the tricycle for fun. Like I wanted to make a vehicle. And then this show opportunity came around and I was like, okay. I finished it out thinking about my dad and I, he would take me to the parish trash dump a lot, which was just, you know, it wasn't like mountains and mountains and miles of trash. It was just 3 long containers where people could come and throw away their bicycles they didn't want anymore. So yeah, we got into a really bad habit of going to the trash dump about 3 times a day until management asked us to stop coming.
Were you taking stuff out of the dump?
Yes.
So you weren't dumping things, you were removing things.
Yeah. So that's a really integral part to who I am and my art process is that my dad sort of raised me with an evolving understanding of how to take things apart, how to fix things, sort of sometimes, the usefulness of stuff, and also sometimes and sometimes not, it's good to be a hoarder. So yeah, we'd go to the trash dump. I'd be like, oh, cool, that's a toy that somebody threw away. Now it's mine. And then that evolved into like looking for tools and materials, and it got to the point where we would go and he'd be like, all right, let's take some of these fence boards away and then we'll have a reason to come back later today. So we were taking...
Is your father an artist?
No, he's retired military. He was in the Air Force for 36 years. But he's from North Louisiana, and his father was a World War II paratrooper, and they all sort of lived with this very, you know, hands-on country lifestyle, hunting, fishing, building stuff. So yeah, the tricycle was sort of to commemorate the memories of taking an absurd amount of stuff from the dump. And the piece on the left was, because my dad worked in the Air Force, he is a firm believer in redundancies because he was a jet mechanic on A-10s. And so there were about 3 ways to operate anything on the plane if something failed. And so, you know, I live my life with a lot of redundancies. Like I carry around 3 expired cards for the same thing, even though I'm like, well, I have it just in case.
Right.
So the piece on the left was called Roadside Assistance, and that was about the fact that my little four-door Mazda, the trunk was half full with extra engine oil, a full tool bag, 150-piece socket set, a 4-way lug wrench, fix-a-flat, a bunch of rags, a safety cone,
A hard hat.
a whole bunch of stuff. And I have a AAA card that gets me free towing. So that piece is about being overprepared. This is a shrine that I made, sort of a working man shrine.
Where is this?
That was at the West Campus Studios at UTSA, right in the middle of the building. And that was the piece that was in the installation earlier. Yeah, and I was thinking about this piece. I guess at the time there was a lot of political sort of things happening, and with politics comes economics and things. And I have family that are, I have some family that are like very political, but also very blue collar. And so I was thinking about how there are people who work their whole lives and sort of pay tribute and worship these icons and identities who are really just their bosses and controlling them. So it's kind of a shrine that's, you know, not really, you know, they're worshiping somebody who's not really helping them. So it's a bunch of found objects and parts. So this is John's deer. This is the tractor that I made for Luminaria. I made it from scratch. I was part of a group of a couple of grad students and Mark McCoyne, and we were accepted to do this roving group of kinetic sculptures. And so we all made our own vehicles, and I never had a tractor, so I wanted a tractor.
Did you ride in it?
I did, yeah. Yeah, so the whole thing is driven by a bicycle pedal, and the whole steering assemblage at the front, I made all that from scratch with scrap metal, and I did a lot of research on like how simple go-kart mechanics are put together. Everything I fabricated from scratch.
Did the lights turn on?
Yeah, the lights all came on. That was all 12-volt car lights that I got from Walmart, and I have some batteries hidden inside. And then my favorite part was, so on the side, right above the pedal is like a cylinder with a water spigot handle at the end, and that was a bed pump for like inflating an air mattress. And it powered an air horn that I made out of PVC pipes and plastic, and I got a really nice deep sound. So it sounded like a barge coming down the river.
Honk your horn as you
Yeah.
rode around.
So we rode those around for Luminaria.
Oh, and you pulled a little picket fence and a cart?
Well, I made that addition the semester after for a performance down at Lone Star, which is in the next picture is. So that was an hour-long durational performance. I turned the back wheels into a treadle mechanism, which is, a treadle is like how old sewing machines used to be run. You'd get the mechanism running, and then the cam action of you stepping on this pedal would keep it moving. And so on that wheel that I'm sitting in front of, I glued sandpaper all around the perimeter of it, and I had all of these Flint emergency fire starters that I bought from Harbor Freight, and I sat there and just ground on that for an hour and drank beer and made sparks. And it's about the diligent worker going to work and doing his job. So, yeah, and then here even more color and more freedom with materials. I started making these plants.
What kind of material is this?
So the top left and the bottom right, those are two rubber tires from like a wagon. And then there are painting rollers, like 6-inch painting rollers stuck off of them, and then roofing nails and some old-fashioned clothespins and rolls of drywall tape. So there's a huge amount of materials, and this was stuff that, like, you know, found object artists, people bring us stuff, and sometimes there's like an ooh-ah object, like, oh, that's really cool, I want to use that. And then there's always these bags of just stuff, like junk. like nails and just pieces of wire, and it's like, who kept this? And no offense, Ken, but it's like stuff that's like became super useful for this body of work, because I was like, you know what, I have all this stuff, why am I saving it?
Right.
And so I started making plants. Both my mom has kept a small garden on the back porch for my whole life, and my dad goes through phases of like, again, people throw away a lot of plants at the trash dump, and you can put a plant back in the ground.
Right.
So he would plant the garden of somebody else's plants and then get tired of it and tear it up. And so those plants were in a show at Pressa House, and this is also at Pressa House. This is my thesis show called Down Home, and it was an installation that encompassed the whole gallery, which is an old house, and it's got 4 rooms and a central hallway. And I just wanted to sort of bring to life the nuanced and melancholy moments of what I enjoy about sort of the ideal worker's shack, country living kind of thing.
This is the same.
Yeah, that's just
One
it's
of
a
the other
separate
rooms.
room in the same gallery. Yeah. And so I was making these moments, like that's a workshop, and the last picture was like a front porch with stuff sticking out of the ground. So it was sort of a homage to my southern living. That's Kathleen, the catfish. That's a giant catfish, swamp monster. And I made that in response to my grandfather had a bass that he caught in Lake D'Arbonne in North Louisiana, and at the time I think it was a small record, and we still have that fish mounted at the house. And so also at the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans, there's a lifelike version of the rougarou, which is Louisiana's Jersey Devil. So I just wanted to make a swamp monster catfish, which was for a monster show at Clamplate. And here's some shots of the kinetic aspects and other things from my thesis.
Where is this shot?
That's at Pressa House Gallery down Pressa Street, downtown.
Oh, I see that.
So this is crude editing. I just put this together for you guys to see some things moving.
And I think that next brings us to where we are tonight. So we have 2 views of the work that's installed upstairs.
Yeah, so this is stuff that I've been making in the last 4 months since graduating. I moved to a new studio at Blue Star. You know, I love the space. There's only 2 electrical outlets, so I have to run a lot of extension cords. I'm like making do, but I'm right by the train tracks, and again, loving free materials, I walk up and down the tracks. And so, yeah, I was using these toolboxes and just recreating these objects. I've seen a lot of places that are terribly organized, but the person who manages them always knows where everything is.
Right.
So that's what the toolboxes are about. And then these pieces, the little framed pieces, I've been really inspired by a lot of the work that's here at the museum. Like especially when Dario's show went up, I really loved his use of objects in that. And then the museum owns a number of shadow boxes that have a lot of neat things in them and just little narratives. And so this work references that, but it's also about, I go to a lot of antique shops and thrift shops, and the people who work there and run those have nothing to do all day except stand there and watch you walk in and out of the store. And sometimes the really clever ones will take objects that they have and make a little thing that they don't think is art. It's just a funny thing for them. And they'll put a funny sign on it, and it'll sit on the wall and just be a chuckle. And so these are things that I found and reimagined what they were or gave them a title. And the 3 pieces on the shelves are actually about during Katrina, when we left for the hurricane. We went up to Bastrop, Louisiana, and stayed with my grandparents for 2 months. And I had nothing to do. I wasn't enrolled in school. And one day we went to the library because my mom just wanted some new books. And I opened up a book on bonsai gardening. and just fell in love with the miniatures, which I guess ties into a lot of my stuff is the
Sure.
miniatures. So yeah, sitting out back of my grandparents' house, which was a beautiful, on a hill, a lot of green trees and oaks and dirt and rocks. And I took the drainage pan that's underneath ceramic pots, and I filled it with dirt and moss and put a little funky piece of root in it that looked really neat and some pebbles. And so these pieces are about that. I really like those sort of scenic little things.
Right.
So.
I think we're at the end.
Thank you.
I know we're running a little late, but if anybody has a quick question, or otherwise people can join you upstairs to see the work in person.
Quick
So,
question,
anybody-
like just as fast as you can. Favorite color? Blue. It was blue. It's like gray now, dark gray.
On the poster for the succeeding smokestack,
Yeah, the champion poster. Yeah.
what was all the fine print?
Oh, that was. I haven't. You know, when I opened up the picture and decided to show it, I started reading the first 4 words and then gave up. But it was just some really convoluted thing about how they're not responsible for anything. Like whatever.
Did you
comes
invent
from-
that, or was that?
I think I
Or you
may have
stole it
taken
from
some of
someone?
the jargon from something and then changed a little bit of it. But yeah, it's supposed to be one of those things that's like, I don't want to read that. You know, no thanks. Terms and agreements, whatever.
A decline of accountability.
Yeah, through just sheer wordage. So.
Do you gather your items as you find them, or do you gather them for the project you have in mind? And how do you store all good stuff?
That's a good question. There are times where I go out and buy something because I'm like, I need more clothespins for this project. Most of the time, though, yeah, I just take whatever anybody will give me, and I just use what I have, and I will go out and buy lumber and like glass and stuff if I'm making small shadow boxes. Storing is always an issue. Like I'm constantly having, I'll go and spend a day in the studio just being like, okay, I'm not going to use this stuff ever. I don't like it. So why do I have it? I put things in a lot of boxes, and I watched a lot of HGTV as a kid, so I'm just like, okay, you just start stacking things against the wall, you can stack stuff in front of that, and then you got things stacked, and you have to move it all to get to the thing in the back. It's just time. It's a lot of time.
So do you get cast off stuff here from the museum, like stuff we
Yeah,
throw out?
I mean, yeah, there's stuff that winds
So-
up in the dumpster and like scrap pieces of lumber and 2x4 and, you know, it's just, well, even, you know, for all of the pieces that, the little found object pieces, sometimes on lunch I'll just walk around and look at the rocks. I've gotten really into rock hunting, and actually out front by the fence I found a piece of petrified poo. It's awesome. It looks just like a turd. But there's really great stuff on the ground and in trash cans if you just look for it and not turn your nose up. I'm like not very picky about materials. Just look, you know.
Great.
So.
Well, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
thank everybody
Thank you.
for joining us tonight.